Wait, no one told me this was going to be recorded.
I can unrecord. Okay. Well, welcome to the Williams Honors College, our inaugural lunchtime seminar for the 2021-2022 academic year. So the idea behind these is that we have a couple of short presentations. They're very entertaining and engaging. And you can spend half an hour with us and learn a couple of interesting things. Eat your lunch. For those of you here in person, it doesn't look like anyone brought their lunch, but if you want to sneak it out now, that'd be perfectly fine. So let me introduce today's first speaker, Professor Brant Lee from the School of Law. Known Brant for a long time, and it started off un-university related. Kids played music together, and that was many years ago. I think I even had hair at the time. So Brant still looked exactly the same as he does now,
Except this is white.
maybe a little more gray, but everything else is unchanged. So today he's gonna give us a quick overview on some topics that he, I think, is very passionate about. Brant, take it away.
Thank you so much. You may have heard a lot about critical race theory. I'm going to share my screen. So I thought it would be interesting to spend a few minutes to talk about what it actually is, as opposed to how it's been presented. So what is all the hoopla about? So last fall, in the middle of a hotly contested presidential election, you may have been paying attention, and President Trump issued an executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. And the claim was that there's a new ideology that teaches that all white people are inherently racist oppressors, that America is fundamentally and irredeemably racist, and rejecting colorblindness, claiming that meritocracy and hard work, even the idea of objectivity, are tools of oppression. And although it was not mentioned in the executive order itself, the new ideology that they called it critical race theory. And the uproar over this new ideology grew, and this year several states have enacted legislation prohibiting critical race theory from being taught in schools. School boards meetings have been packed with angry parents claiming that the children are being taught not to be colorblind, taught to think that their parents were racist, right? Including here in Ohio. There have been bills proposed in Ohio that are currently moving through the legislative process, and the expectation is that in one form or another, one of them will become law. And they prohibit the exact same things that the executive order prohibited last fall. And you know, on their face, these don't seem like a bad list of things to prohibit, because the way they're framed is very extreme, right? And so when I first saw this list, I thought, well, that's not a problem. I don't teach any of these things. That the United States is fundamentally racist, or that an individual, by virtue of their nationality, color, or race, is inherently racist, right? So I thought, well, maybe that's not really a problem. But the question arises, what got my attention is that they're calling it critical race theory. And I have been teaching critical race theory for a very long time. And what I teach does not resemble in any way what they've described. So let me just take a minute to talk about what critical race theory actually is. Right? So technically, critical race theory is a name that was given to the work of a group of legal scholars that were that they were producing in the late 70s and early 80s, starting then. And it wasn't actually called critical race theory until there was an academic workshop that called it, they had to come up with a title, they called it a critical race theory workshop, and the name stuck, right? And for people who aren't in academia, right, what that means is a group of law professors got together to, like, maybe a dozen, less than 20 certainly, to share their ideas about their latest draft of a law review article. So pretty high level theory, right, that not even most law students are taught. Occasionally, I have taught a seminar where I've taught critical race theory. I haven't had the chance to teach that actually in several years. So most law students don't even get this. But I can tell you that the things that have been attributed to it are incorrect. But rather than dwelling on whether people talking about critical race theory are being historically accurate, I don't think anybody actually cares, right, about whether they're using the right term, right? I'm going to describe the substance of what these law professors are writing about and compare that to what people are concerned about, right? The first thing I'm going to say is there is no authoritative definition for critical race theory, and that's because it's an academic movement. And if anybody who knows academic movements knows that there's no organization that's called the Critical Race Theory Association, right? There's no membership requirements. You get any 3 law professors in a room and they will find 29 different things to disagree about. And that is true within the group of scholars that call themselves critical race theorists. So it's really hard to pin down. So it's surprising for somebody outside to say, well, this is what critical race theory consists of, when we can't even agree ourselves. But to call it a thing, you know, to call it, there has to be some commonalities, so I'm not going to duck that. So the way I think about critical race theory is that it was scholars, mostly scholars of color, but not all, and not all Black either. There were Asians or Hispanics in the group right from the beginning, responding to the situation that they saw at the time in law as it related to race. And here's what the situation was. There was, as there is now, persistent racial inequality, right? That is kind of a default fact for Americans, right? Whether we're talking about health or wealth or income or incarceration, right? There's persistent inequality between races. And we were in a situation where the law was defining the harm as things that are caused by intentional discrimination. So generally speaking, under Equal Protection Clause jurisprudence, it's not discrimination that violates the Constitution unless somebody intentionally wanted to discriminate. And as a result of that definition of harm, if you can't prove that somebody was a racist, right, then we don't do anything. And the kind of default presumption is that, well, that inequality isn't caused by discrimination if we can't prove that there's a racist. So we're just going to leave it alone because it must just be natural. It must be, maybe it's merit, right? Maybe that inequality is caused, and I think there's really a presumption that there's a lack of merit. That is sort of all that we're left with, because those are the only 2 narratives that we know how to understand. And so what critical race theorists did was they tried to tell the story from a different perspective. And, you know, they started off getting a name for themselves by using narrative. And there was a debate about, does this count as scholarship? Because they were telling stories, right? And to me, what that was in the early days, they didn't have the vocabulary, right? Looking at the legal doctrine that existed, they didn't have the vocabulary to describe what they saw. So they started to tell stories about, look, this is how it feels, right? This is not fair, what's going on. This discrimination is not good. So they developed some, you know, they started to develop some theory, right? And I categorized it in these 3 ways. And as I said, this is just mine. But one of them is that not all discrimination is intentional. So that's when we talk about implicit bias. That's when we start to talk about stereotypes that operate maybe at a subconscious level. Not all harm, not all racial harm is a result of discrimination, right? So you can have systems, you can have historical legacy systems. You know, just for quick example, it's become commonplace knowledge by now, right, that there was a long period during which the federal government encouraged segregation and encouraged bankers and builders to restrict their property from being sold to Black people. And that happened at the time when the federal government was heavily subsidizing homeownership. And so Black people were not allowed in at the ground level in acquiring homes at the time when those homes over the next couple of decades would triple and quadruple in value. And so all of that growth in value was not available to Black people. And so today, right, it's still true that the wealth disparity is 10-1 for median household income. And that disparity makes there be a lot less opportunity available, right, if you have a lot less wealth. And there doesn't have to be a single racist alive now for that disparity to still hurt, right, and cause harm. The presumption of merit is not always warranted. I mean, this is kind of linked to the last one I said. I don't know if that even needs a great example. I would just say on this one to just think about how much it's almost default, it almost feels like common sense to presume that success is the result of merit, right? We see rich people, we say they must have done something right. And I think implicitly when we see people who haven't done well, we say, well, they must have done something wrong, right? Right. And so, right, we kind of assume that. And so, let me now talk about some of the things that critical race theory has been accused of. Right? Because, so on the subject of meritocracy, right, which has been defended in some of these statutes, meritocracy has been wielded to deny justice, right? So that when there's inequality and people start to complain about what's unfair about that, the response is often, well, you're not working hard enough or you're not smart enough, right? You're not succeeding in the meritocracy and that's your fault. The critique is not the critique of meritocracy. The critique is the critique of how it's been wielded to silence people complaining about injustice. Right? The same thing is true about objectivity. Nobody's actually challenging objective truth. Well, let me take that back. The philosophers, right, the really high theory people are saying, oh, is there such a thing as objective truth? But that's not limited to race theory, right? That's all kinds of philosophers, right, in every subject. But when people said, I'm being discriminated against, this workplace is not fair, I think I should have gotten that promotion. And the response would be something along the lines of, you're not being objective, right? This is too close to you. You're taking this too personally. It's, you're thinking about it too much in race terms because you're a minority. You have to be objective, and you can realize that since there's been no proof of racism, there must not be any discrimination going on. You might also understand this if you're a woman, right? And you talk about something or complain about something, and the response is you're just being hysterical and emotional. You should be more objective. And in both of those examples, right, it's not actually objective. What was being presented as objective was, well, in that last case, right, was men saying, well, what we think is objective and what you think is subjective. And so again, in both those cases, it's not objectivity itself. It's objectivity being presented, misused, right, in a way to silence other perspectives. I don't want to take, I think I'm at the end of my time, but I want to run through some important things for you. I said at the beginning that I thought, well, maybe I'm safe. I don't teach all of these horrible things, so none of those things describe me. Well, in Tennessee, where they've already passed the statute, right, there's a group in Tennessee called Moms for Liberty, and there's a chapter here in Summit County that wrote out a letter explaining all the things that they're complaining about, that they thought, this is critical race theory and we want this out of the curriculum. And the nice thing about the letter is it details exactly what they're objecting to. Here's what they're objecting to. Chapter book on Martin Luther King, picture books about Ruby Bridges, right, one of the little girls who was the first to integrate a school. Right, this picture was picked out in particular. It shows a young white boy pointing at the girls saying, "Go back to Mexican school, you don't belong here." And what they're objecting to is a depiction of a white person being racist. In history, this is another one that they're objecting to. These are pictures of things that actually happened, right? And the objection is you are presenting white people as being racist. It's going to make our kids think that all white people are racist. This picture does not say that all white people are racist. And so I think the question is, why do you think that this picture suggests all white people are racist? Right? Because nobody's saying that, and this picture doesn't say that. This picture says that there were racist white people in history. That is undeniably true. Picture of the Ruby Bridges. Right? This shows an angry white mob. We're angry white mobs. I think we've seen the actual pictures. I'm just going to close with this picture. It's true that the world is changing and becoming much more racially diverse, at least in America. I should have said this country is changing. The world has always been diverse. And I'm going to say that actually it's a little bit natural. I can sort of understand how, if you're telling the story of America, you generally do tell it from the story of the majority of the people. Right? You can't put together a narrative that takes the perspective of every group that's 5 or 8 or 10% of the population. But the problem is that we promise people that they will be equal. Anybody can be an American. Right? So when we tell a story that excludes a significant perspective, right, that breaks the promise. And in my view, critical race theory is trying to tell a different story. And you know, the big question that the current controversy raises is, how do you think that Black people's perspective should be taught? Right? How do you think that the fact that Black unemployment is consistently over decades, double white employment, right, all the time? How should we talk about that, right? If we talk about it at all, and that is the challenge that critical race theory presents. That.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience, or if you're online, please type something in the chat and we can handle that one. While we wait, let's have Steve come up and get ready. But are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, that's very good. Like, how would you recommend, like, I don't know, it seems like this topic of like inflames a lot of tempers pretty quickly in my experience. Like, how would you recommend, I guess, kind of diffusing that and maybe like just kind of explaining that? I mean, it's like people don't like to hear that like they're wrong, but like if they just have like the wrong idea, is there like a good way in many to kind of diffuse that and kind of explain, well, okay, that's different or more
I don't know how much diffusing can be done at a certain stage. So when you're at a school board meeting screaming, right, that I'm not the one to ask about how to deal with that exactly. Right? As far as how to present the issue in a way that maybe doesn't inflame, I'm actually, parts of this is kind of trying to do that. Right? Simplifying the critical race theory message to what I think is really the core, telling the story from a different perspective, and asking, how do you think that should be handled? Like, if the people have reasonably a different perspective on what America has been like, right, for them. And I think that most people can understand that, you know, if you're Black, you might have a different perspective on how great the Constitution was, since slavery continued for another 70 years, right, after that. not really that great, at least for 70 years. Right? And wasn't all peachy keen after that either. So, I mean, I think that anybody could understand that a Black person might have that perspective, and to ask them, how do you think that should be taught?
Thanks. So in the interest of time, I'll now introduce our next short speaker. He's not short, but he's going to give a short talk. Steve Weeks. So like Brant, I've known Steve for a long time. I think you started a year before I started, I believe. Before. And so, like I said, Steve is one of the people around here with probably a 4-digit student ID number or employee ID number, which always means that you've been here a long time. So he's currently chair of the Department of Biology. He has a wide variety of research interests, including evolutionary biology and population modeling. So today he's going to talk to us about sustainability and global climate issues.
Hi, thanks for coming. Yeah, so I am not going to talk about 80 things because I have 10 minutes, but I will point out that a group of people, about 200 leaders, scientists, and the like, came up with a book that has a different view than if you're like me, you hear about all the horrible things that are happening, and it's almost paralyzing, right? It is just the amount of things that are happening because of climate change and the scale at which this is happening seems like it's overwhelming. Cool thing about this book is it came up with 80 ways that we can actually, the name is Drawdown. If we did all 80 of these things globally, we could actually reduce carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And at least if we do many of them, we can slow down and potentially stop this horrible climate effect. So I don't know about you folks, but many people think that the problem is so big that the way in which we're going to fix it is by having big companies, having governments. They have to get in there and make changes to have this stop, right? And that's true. The book outlines 64 ways in which we can have what I call large-scale global fixes that take big picture work, right? I mean, governments, major corporations have to get in there and expend a lot of effort. So I don't know, like, do you guys have, if you were going to be a big government and stop climate change, what would you pursue right off the bat? Elimination of coal, yeah, switching from coal and gas power generation to solar, right? Pardon me?
I would do nuclear.
Nuclear? Yeah, right? So those are the kinds of things that are big picture, right? The cool thing about this book is it not only said what these 80 things are, it ranked them. It told you how much pursuing these ideas over basically from now to 2050 will reduce carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents in gigatons. And the goal is about 1,400 gigatons reduction of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalents. And so these are ranked. I didn't put all 80 on here, right, because it doesn't fit. But these are ranked from most important to least important in terms of the amount of carbon dioxide equivalents are taken out of the atmosphere. The thing that really got me about this book is that it came up with things that I had no idea about. The number one thing to reduce climate change is to recycle the gases that are in compressors for our refrigerators, our air conditioners, our freezers, because those gases are way worse than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. So if we only did one thing, not I'm saying that we should, but if we did, that would be the thing to shoot for now, right? And so, of course, that would be a large scale. You'd have to have a lot of backing, maybe government backing. So that was not obvious. The things that you guys suggested, switching from carbon-based fuels to renewables, are in fact quite important. And number two is wind turbines. I was thinking maybe solar might be up there more. It is quite important. But wind, especially on land, so they've got wind on land and then wind offshore, both quite important in reducing carbon dioxide release into the atmosphere. Solar is also quite important. So this is the solar panels that you see. And this is a different kind. I'm from the West, and you see these out there, where they have mirrors that reflect light up into a water holding vessel, and then it boils it off. So yes, those are quite important. Other things also that you might not think of is rebuilding our ecosystems. So humans, yay, we've gone in and whacked a whole bunch of ecosystems. The number three thing that we can do large scale is rebuild tropical forests, replant them, rebuild temperate forests. Right here in the United States, we have some of the biggest temperate forests in the world. Peatlands and at a lower level, coastal wetlands. So either stop decimating them or actually rebuild them. That will have a major impact on climate change. And then, I should point this, things related to agriculture. And again, I have not put all 80 on there, but there's quite a few in here that are specifically related to how we raise food, okay? And a lot of them are things I had never heard of. One of them is this silvopasture thing. So cattle are bad for the environment. They release a lot of methane. And you can raise them in different ways so that their methane production is a lot lower. One of those is just having them graze in areas that are tree covered. And they have trees mixed in with grasses. And the tree cover helps them thermoregulate better, and it helps reduce methane production. And there's quite a few different types of ways of raising our agricultural products. And the thing that's interesting about this is a lot of them are more efficient than the ways that we do it now. The big problem is that we are so committed to the current ways. The change, all the production facilities and tractors and the like, to move to these other things can be a big initial outlay of money, but over time, it would be actually more efficient and better for the environment. So, and there's some interesting things out there, like educating girls, that would take too much time for me to bring up now, but that's quite important. And there's lots more ways here. The thing I want to point out, though, is that the notion that we just have to have our governments get in there and go after this stuff and agitate for that, which I totally support doing that. But we as individuals can have a major impact on climate change in the things that we do individually that doesn't take any kind of change at some global level. The book outlines 18 ways that you individually can make a difference. Anyone want to guess what the big ones are? I might have heard of at least one of them.
Drive less, maybe?
Pardon me?
Drive less.
Drive less? Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, there's ride sharing is one of them.
Online, we have vegetarianism.
Yes, that is the second most important thing, and as an individual, and the fourth most important overall, right? So The number one is not wasting food. We waste a huge amount of food. We waste it individually, throw it out because it's expired. Or we just let stuff rot in the refrigerator. The problem is there's a lot of energy that goes into the production of this food. And if you just pitch it, right, that is a total waste. The second thing is, if it's produce, you throw it into landfill, it gets covered up and it gets degraded and it gets turned into methane. Methane gas is generated from that. So food waste is the number one thing that you can do individually. There's more problems than individual food waste. There's a lot of agricultural food waste, but nonetheless, you as an individual can stop wasting food and have a huge impact on climate change, for God's sakes. Also saves you money, right? Yeah, the second most important thing is being a vegan or a vegetarian. The amount of energy that's lost between the production of the original food, like corn, and then it goes through a chicken or cattle to get to you is huge, like 80 to 90% loss of that energy. So by cutting out the middleman, so to speak, we will have a huge effect on global warming. So that is something, and I know as a big meat eater, that could be problematic, right? To people's choices. You can just reduce the amount of meat that you eat. You can change from beef, which is by far the worst, to chicken or poultry, right? That will have an effect. Anytime you make a choice of not eating a steak and instead eating a piece of chicken, or even better, a corn cob or whatever, maybe not the cob, the corn, that is not even more healthy for you, but it is actually a major impact on climate change. Now, for those students out here, you might look at some of these and go, well, it's kind of expensive for some of this stuff. The inexpensive fixes here are the first two I mentioned. And it turns out that moving to LED lighting, now notice that the drop here is pretty dramatic in terms of the effect. And that's an interesting thing about this book. It outlines how important various things are. But nonetheless, this is a relatively simple fix. Just go in and replace your light bulbs with LED, okay? If you conserve water at home, again, that has an effect. Now, one of the things that I note is that a lot of people think, well, I'm doing my part, I recycle, right? Well, recycling is doing your part, especially to keep plastics out of the ocean and things like that. But in terms of climate change, it doesn't have that much of an effect. Same thing with composting. Here's the ride sharing thing. It turns out that the estimates from these science folks is it's not going to have that much of an impact. Now, things that are more expensive, I looked into putting solar panels on my house. It's pretty expensive, but that's the third most important thing that you as an individual can do. You can buy an electric vehicle. That would be the fourth most important. Hybrid, a little bit further down the line here. If you have an older house, insulating that. Installing smart thermostats, that helps to some degree. I lived in this place, it was super windy, I was like, wind generator. The wind generators are not very efficient. So it's way better to put solar panels on your roof, even here in Ohio, than it is to put up a wind generator, unfortunately. So you can see it has a negligible effect. Now, the thing I want to underscore here, and again, these are things that you can do right now. Maybe not the more expensive things, but a lot of these things you can do today, right? And I want to point out that these are on the same scale. So the things that people think, well, this is only going to be dealt with if someone else does something at some big scale. It is not true. It is true that we need those things also. But you as an individual, the number 3 and 4 of everything that we can do as a species are reduce food waste and becoming a vegetarian or a vegan, right? the third and fourth most important of every of the 80 things. So you can do that now, right? And it's going to make a huge impact, right? This is huge. So don't think that this is a debilitating, like huge problem and I'm just head down, going to live my life. I don't really have any way to affect what's going on. You do have a way. You have several ways, but two really important ways. One of the things about not wasting food is a lot of people don't buy like oranges because they have a spot on them, or an apple that looks weird, right? That's called, sometimes they call it ugly produce, right? And then the grocery store just pitches them. They just throw them out. So if you were to buy some of those, that would be another way of not wasting food. And then you can, some places will buy those, and then you can buy at like a farmer's market those things. So I've run through my time. All 80 ideas are up here on this website. It's a Unitarian Universalist Church in Fairlawn. If you want to go there, you can see all of them, or purchase this book. They also have a website just for this book. In fact, you go there, you can get connections to that to see all the various ways. That's it.
Thanks, Steve. So some questions?
Other Steve? I personally believe that policies just kind of from a policy perspective, taxes, all sorts of policies. Take that, for example, my first thought is, well, energy is more expensive. I'm going to
Yeah.
I'm curious about larger scale things that will still impact or like a carbon tax or other large.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm not a policy guy, to be honest, but my personal feeling is that the carbon tax is a good idea because it does change the equations that people use in their heads to make decisions on things, as well as corporations and the like too, right? So I do think that's a good way to go, and some countries have instituted such taxes, and it seems to be working. And I think we were really close to being able to do that. I don't know how long ago it is now, maybe 10 years ago. And then I think it's during Obama. It just didn't happen. So yeah, I think any way that you can change people's behavior to do the right thing, maybe not anyway, but ways that are reasonable, and I think carbon tax is one of those, is I think a good way to go.
So we had a question online. Start off with a comment that meat is really tasty. But then the question was, do you have any thoughts about sort of the synthetic meat products, also products from mushrooms and those kinds of sources?
Yeah, so I think the big loss of energy is in, you know, the metabolism of the organism that you're raising. So and you're raising a mammal that is a warm-blooded thing, you know, the loss is like 90% or something. So if you can skip that middle position, right, then the energy that you're creating from a plant-based product is the way to go. 80, 90%, that's a huge loss, right? I'm not saying that there couldn't be ways that actually cost more energy to make stuff, and I don't really know how they make, you know, the Beyond Burgers and stuff like that. But if it is more efficient than going through a cow, right, which I would think it would be, then it's better to go with those products.
Are there other questions, either online or here? And if you have questions for Professor Lee, I think we could take those as well. Okay. Well, I would like to thank you all for coming, whether you are here in person or if you joined us online. I said, and I would especially like to thank our speakers today. Professor Lee, Professor Weeks. You guys did a great job. Tough act to follow. But we will have these regularly for the rest of the semester. So the idea is the first Friday and the third Thursday. Kind of catchy. But those 2 days every month, we will have 2 speakers. So look for the next one on the third Thursday of this month. And in addition, I will remind you that once a month on Tuesdays, we try to have sort of longer talks, more in depth and involved. Again, all of these are recorded. So Professor Lee came and spoke a couple weeks ago, and we've recorded today's. We'll record the ones in the future, and they'll all be available on our YouTube channel, because that's how we roll in the Williams Honors College. But thanks again for the speakers and our guests today. Hope you've enjoyed it, and that's it. Take care.
Well, it's, depends on.